Hey guys, John from the Crafting Brothers here. I hope you liked that little intro there. That was fun to do. A couple of weeks ago, I painted up a set of these undead army skeletons. And I thought it would be a good project this week to maybe build something that showcases where they may have come from. So this week, I'm going to be building a graveyard. And this thing came out really cool. There's a lot of 3D printed parts in there, and half of it's handcrafted, half of it's 3D printed. So let's get right to it. I'll show you how I built this. I'm going to start this project with a rectangle cut piece of XPS foam from my scrap pile. There's no specific measurement here. It's going to end up being about 10 by 12 inches. Next, I'm going to need about 10 or so square strips of XPS foam, which I'll need to build a wrought iron fence around the graveyard. This is the basic layout for the graveyard, and the 3D printed files that you see here I'll talk about more later in this video. I want to just cut the edges and corners down a little bit because I'm going to be using my Nasdar chemical to melt the edges. As I mentioned in some of my previous videos, if you don't have Nasdar, which most of you won't, you can just use acetone or nail polish. I want the ground of this graveyard to be made of stone, so I'm cutting out a 1-inch square grid on the surface to give that look. After the grid is cut, I'm using a ballpoint pen here to deepen the lines in the foam. I've been using this soldering iron and tinfoil technique on all my XPS foam. It just gives me better detail when I'm ready to paint. After that, I'll need to go back over the lines again with my ballpoint pen. I'm texturing the pillars for my wrought iron fence here, and when I'm done with this, I'll glue a top piece on each of the pillars. Next, I need to create the brick texture on all the pillars, so the technique I use here is to slightly score each side with an X-Acto blade as evenly as possible. Then, using a pencil or a ballpoint pen, just trace the lines around the pillars to create the brick texture. After that's done, everything's going to get a coat of Mod Podge and black paint. Okay, so I found a good use for these little cocktail toothpick things that I bought a while ago. I used these in the first movie that we made for the Crafting Brothers, in which I used these for weapons for an animated thing. But now that I have these, I'm realizing that these are going to be perfect for an iron gate for my graveyard here. So I'm just going to sort of lay these out and figure out how I want to configure these. But we'll basically have enough to make one section of a gate here. So it looks like maybe 7 or so of these. And then I'll just take a couple of them and cut them and do a cross thing here, and we will make gates out of cocktail toothpicks. I was thinking that getting all these to line up perfectly for me to glue them together was going to be a little bit tricky. So I decided to tape a piece of duct tape upside down to hold the cocktail skewers in place while I glue them. Next is going to be a coat of pewter gray on the pillars and the graveyard base. I'm also painting the edges here with a dark brown. To finish off all the stone structures, I'm going to dry brush the pillars and base plate with granite gray. So now it's time to talk a little bit about these 3D files I printed out for my graveyard. Because the scale of this build is so small, basically 28mm, I decided to print out this mausoleum, the gravestones, and a few other items, including the skull mountain that's going to be at the back of my graveyard. The last thing I needed to print out is this front gate for the graveyard, so I'll continue painting while this is still printing. So after priming all of these pieces with the flat gray, I'm going to go ahead and start painting these up with the same colors that I basically used for the stones. The skull mountain is also going to get a coat of pewter gray first, and then I'll use my granite gray and a few other colors to finish off the rock. To give the skull mountain some additional detail, I decided to dry brush a bit of raw umber and yellow on the surface. I'm also using some black wash to highlight the detail, cracks and crevices, and give the rock a little bit more depth. The wood coffin and the dead tree are both going to get a dry brushing of tan. I'm giving the mausoleum a coat of dark green to give the illusion that it's old copper, and then I'll just paint the edges with black. I'm ready to start assembling the wrought iron gate. So to do this, I just need to poke a few holes in the side of the pillar and then glue the gate section in. This graveyard is really coming together now, and I think it looks great. Now it's time to lay everything out and finish with all the details. What I wanted to do is actually have some open dug graves here. So what I'm going to do, because I'm planning on putting these little guys in their grave here, so I'm going to cut out a little hole and as if this was their grave. We're going to make 3 of these. Okay, and then we're going to dig those out. I'm using my chemical again here to melt the bottoms of the graves. Again, if you don't have this, you can just use acetone or nail polish. After that, I'm just going to paint the graves up with a burnt umber. The entrance to the graveyard needed some steps to get to the gate. So what I'm going to do is cut up and texture some popsicle sticks so they look like old wood planks. After a coat of golden brown paint, I'm going to use an acrylic burnt umber ink to finish off these wood steps. After finishing assembling all of my wrought iron gates, I'm ready to give the whole structure and all of the pieces a black wash. And I'm using a Liquitex black wash, which has a little bit of brown in it. Next, I'm ready to flock this piece, so I decided that some ground up sheet moss would give me the look I want. It's going to basically give me a little green, but mostly look like dead grass, which is what I want. After flocking the edges, I decided to add a dirt pathway using brown tile grout and then a bit of plain dirt on the outside of that. So after I finish washing the pillars on this wrought iron fence, I'm ready to attach everything to the base and wrap up this graveyard build. And that's a wrap for my Undead Graveyard. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun to make. Please send me your comments and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you next week with another build or challenge.